This is a book, The Complete Works of Vincent van Gogh. As you can see, it's a pretty heavy, thick book. It has every painting that Van Gogh ever painted, at least the ones that weren't destroyed somewhere. And along with that, there's no narrative, which I like. There's only descriptions, and in some cases they have Van Gogh's letters next to the painting when Van Gogh himself described the painting. It's quite nice. They're not in color, a few color, but most of them are black and white, so it makes it a little difficult. But there's over 800, as I said, and most of them are probably in the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, Holland. The museum opened in 1974, I believe. Before it opened, the museum opened, the paintings made a world tour, and they came to San Francisco, and I went to see them. Of course, I was deep into my Van Gogh period at that time, and I stood in the long line to go in to see these paintings. It was just incredible. But the problem was, when I went in to see the paintings, they had so many paintings that they had small partitions all over with maybe 6 paintings in this group and 6 in that group. It's like a maze walking through there to see all the paintings. And the crowds were packed. It was jam-packed. It was like a football stadium, you know, people all over. It was hard to see them. And one of the things that they had there that it upset me at the time was that they had paintings were roped off, say 6 paintings in a little roped off area where you couldn't get too close. Behind the rope was a docent who walked back and forth between those 6 paintings and talked about them. And so there were a lot of docents around there. It was a huge show. And what upset me about it is, I said, I was very much into Van Gogh at the time, and I had read every one of his letters at least twice, and I carried that book around like I told you. And I listened to these people, these docents, talking about these paintings that I felt that I knew. And I knew Van Gogh, and I knew what he was doing, and I had actually been out painting in the wind and the rain and that stuff myself. And to listen to these people talk about these paintings, I was furious, because they had no idea what was involved in there. They just gave a little art talk about it, you know, which had nothing to do with the painting or the artist. You know, little trivial things like he cut off his ear, and you know, all these little things that had nothing to do with his paintings. Yeah, I felt like jumping over that rope and giving him a good shake and telling him, you don't know what you're talking about, you know. But it brings to mind something else that's important. And that's the fact that when you read about art, you read it in art books, or even if you go to college, you find the same thing. They'll tell you what art is. The books will tell you what art is, and that's wrong. Books can't tell you what art is. They give you the wrong impression. And that's not good. I'll tell you why. They made a study in Brazil, in these primitive tribes. They found 2 tribes separate from each other that were about the same level of development. They had houses, and they had chickens, and they grew some food to eat and so on. But they were basically isolated from the outside world. And they go into this first tribe, and they bring in a box full of whisks. You know those cooking whisks? They go to the chief and they say, we want to show you what these are. And they said, and they got some eggs, and they whipped up an egg and they fried it, and they said, it's to make scrambled eggs. That's what these are for. See how nice it works? All the tribe were looking at it, and they mumbled amongst themselves, and they took off. They left this huge box full of these whisks for the people to use. So then they go to the next tribe, and they do the same thing, except they don't tell them what they are. They just bring this big box of whisks, and they tell the chief, here's a gift for you, and they left it and took off. So 6 months later, they come back to the first tribe. Here's this box that's almost still full of whisks. Nobody's using them. There's a couple that have been used around, and they're just sitting there in the, and they talked to the chief, and they said, what's the matter? And he says, well, we don't like our eggs that way, so nobody used them. Okay, so they go to the next tribe, and they go there and they find that they've been using these things for all sorts of things. They've decorated their huts with them, and some even put them on their headdresses, and kids were playing with them and making different things. And so all these different uses they came up with them. And the reason now, the conclusion they made from that was, when you define something, it limits everybody's idea about what it is, and they stopped thinking about it. The first tribe thought, this is to make eggs, we don't like eggs, so we don't use it. The other tribe had no idea what they were, so they just invented things for it. And that's the same with art. If these people tell you what it is, if critics and books tell you what art is, then you have to, that's what you think it is, and you never open your mind up to what it really is. You have to look at paintings on your own and decide yourself what it is and what it isn't. Do you see? It's a very important thing. So when you go to a museum, you don't have to listen to the docents that stand there and tell you about painting. Just bypass them. They're nice people. I have nothing against docents. Most of them are volunteers. They probably love art, but they just don't know what they're talking about. How could they? You have to be out in the field. You have to have been out there and done that stuff before you know anything about it. And even then, you don't know what the artist was trying to do. It's up to you to become aficionado, to understand yourself. Look at the subject. Figure it out yourself. Get something out of it. Okay, that's all for today. See you next week. Go to my website. Send me an email.